I'm Ellie, 34 female. I work as a librarian in a moderately sized city, a life of quiet order and the gentle rustle of turning pages that has always suited me. My apartment is my sanctuary, filled with more books than furniture, and my cat, a grumpy Persian named Winston, is my most consistent companion. For most of my life, this quiet existence was beautifully complemented by the warmth and noise of a close-knit family, anchored by my grandparents, Samuel and Helen. They were the architects of our family's story. I thought my bond with my siblings, Vanessa and Mark, was just as solid, a foundational part of that structure. But I would soon discover that behind my back, they had orchestrated a betrayal so deep it threatened to erase my place in our family's history. They just didn't count on my grandfather having one last story to tell. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Our grandparents' house wasn't just a building, it was a living museum of our childhoods. Every corner held a story, every scuff on the floor was a memory. Grandpa Samuel, a retired civil engineer, had built the sturdy oak bookshelves that lined his study, each one groaning under the weight of history tomes and engineering manuals. Grandma Helen, a retired librarian herself, had been the one to fill them. It was she who taught me the magic of the Dewey Decimal System, the quiet power of a well-told story. My own career choice was, in many ways, a love letter to her. The house smelled perpetually of her lemon polish and his pipe tobacco, a scent that meant safety, stability, and unconditional love. Growing up, the three of us grandchildren were treated with impeccable fairness. Vanessa, my older sister by 6 years, was the leader. Ambitious and sharp, she was always organizing our childhood games with the ruthless efficiency of a CEO. Mark, 2 years my junior, was the charmer. He could talk his way out of any trouble with a disarming smile and a quick joke. And I was Ellie, the observer, the quiet one content with a book in the sunny spot on the living room rug. Our grandparents celebrated our differences. They bought Vanessa her first briefcase for her 10th birthday, enrolled Mark in a junior public speaking course, and gifted me a first edition copy of my favorite book. They saw us, each of us, and made us feel valued for who we were. Their love was the golden thread that stitched our family tapestry together. I remember one summer afternoon when I was about 12. Grandpa Samuel sat the three of us down in his workshop. He had 3 identical wooden boxes on his workbench. He explained that he had built them from the wood of an old maple tree that had fallen in their backyard. "This tree watched all of you grow up," he said, his voice raspy but kind. "A piece of it belongs to each of you." He told us they were treasure boxes for us to keep our most important things in. Vanessa immediately declared hers would be for her future stock certificates. Mark joked that he'd keep his best jokes in his. I knew, without a doubt, I would fill mine with letters and photographs. Even then, our personalities were set in stone. The point wasn't what we put inside, but that he had given us each the same foundation, the same sturdy box to build upon. Grandma Helen's lessons were quieter. She taught us how to bake, how to listen, and how to find answers. When I was struggling with a school project, she wouldn't give me the answer. She'd walk me to the encyclopedia and show me how to find it myself. "The answer is always there, Ellie," she'd say. "You just have to know how to look." It was a mantra that would serve me well, both in my career and in the difficult days to come. She and I shared a special bond over books. We had our own 2-person book club, discussing characters and plots for hours. Vanessa found it dreadfully boring, and Mark would just make fun of the titles. But Grandma Helen understood. It felt like she understood the very language of my soul. As we grew into adults, our paths diverged, yet we always circled back to our grandparents' home for holidays and birthdays. Vanessa became a high-flying financial advisor, living in a sleek downtown condo. Her life was a whirlwind of client meetings and networking events. She spoke a language of portfolios and dividends that felt foreign to me. Mark bounced between jobs before landing in car sales, where his natural charm was a valuable asset. He always had a new watch or a flashy new gadget, but there was a constant undercurrent of financial anxiety beneath his polished exterior. And I became a librarian, finding immense satisfaction in my stable, if modest, career. I owned my small apartment, had a solid retirement plan, and lived within my means. I was happy. I considered myself successful in my own way. During these family gatherings, I began to notice a subtle shift. Vanessa would often steer the conversation toward finances. She'd praise my responsible lifestyle in a way that felt condescending. "It's so smart how Ellie lives so simply," she'd say, a tight smile on her face. "No mortgage on a big house, no expensive car payments. She's got it all figured out." Mark would chime in, "Yeah, Ellie's set, not a care in the world." At the time, I took it as a clumsy compliment. I thought they were just acknowledging my different priorities. I didn't see the narrative they were carefully constructing, not just for me, but for the most important audience in the room, our grandparents. They were painting a picture of me as the self-sufficient one, the one who didn't need anything. It was a masterpiece of misdirection, a slow and steady campaign waged over Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. They were laying the groundwork for their betrayal, brick by insidious brick, right there in the house that love built. And I, lost in the comfortable tapestry of our shared memories, was completely blind to it. The change became more pronounced after Grandpa Samuel's 80th birthday. His steps grew slower, his stories began to repeat, and the unshakable foundation of our family started to show its first cracks. His health was declining, and with it came a new and uncomfortable dynamic among the siblings. Suddenly, conversations about our grandparents' care became frequent, and I found myself on the outside looking in. Vanessa, citing her expertise as a financial advisor, took the lead on all discussions about their estate, their medical bills, and their future needs. "It's complicated stuff, Ellie," she'd say, waving a dismissive hand when I tried to ask questions. "You don't need to worry your head about it. Mark and I have it under control." Mark, for his part, became her loyal lieutenant. He would echo her sentiments, often using his charm to deflect my concerns. If I suggested a different approach to their in-home care or questioned a decision they'd made, he'd put an arm around my shoulder and say, "Don't you worry, Elle. Van knows what she's doing. We're just trying to make things easier for everyone, especially you." The phrase, "especially you," started to become a common refrain. It was meant to sound considerate, as if they were protecting me from a burden. In reality, it was a wall carefully built to keep me out. They were isolating me from the process, positioning me as a loving but ultimately uninvolved relative rather than a core decision-maker. I remember one particular Sunday afternoon. I'd arrived at our grandparents' house with a bag of groceries, planning to cook dinner. I walked in to find Vanessa and Mark huddled with Grandma Helen at the kitchen table, stacks of papers spread out before them. The moment I entered, they went silent. Vanessa quickly gathered the papers into a neat pile and slid them into a leather-bound folder. "Oh, Ellie, we didn't expect you so soon," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Mark stood up and gave me an awkward hug. "We were just going over some boring insurance stuff with Grandma," he explained, a little too quickly. "You know, getting their affairs in order." Grandma Helen looked tired, a crease of worry between her brows. "It's all so confusing," she murmured, looking from Vanessa to Mark. "But your sister says it's for the best." I asked what was for the best, what they were deciding. Vanessa cut in smoothly. "Just administrative things, Ellie. Power of attorney, healthcare directives. We're handling it." She then turned the conversation to my work, asking about a recent author event at the library. The subject was changed, the door was closed, and I was left standing on the threshold, feeling a cold draft of exclusion. The whispers continued. I'd call my grandmother, and she'd mention that Vanessa and Mark had visited the day before, bringing some documents for her and Grandpa to sign. When I asked what they were, she was vague. "Oh, you know, Vanessa says it's just to make things simpler down the line. She's so good with all that money talk." They were positioning themselves as the responsible ones, the ones managing the difficult but necessary tasks of an aging couple's life. My contributions, cooking meals, driving them to appointments, spending quiet hours reading to my grandfather when his eyes grew too weak, were framed as sentimental, emotional support. Important, yes, but separate from the real business of the estate. The narrative about my financial security also grew louder. During a family dinner, Mark was complaining about a slow month at the dealership. Vanessa turned to me and said, loud enough for our grandparents to hear, "Well, at least Ellie doesn't have to deal with that kind of stress. That's the benefit of a stable government job and no dependents. You're so lucky to be that secure, Ellie." It was a loaded statement, layered with implications. It suggested my life was not just stable, but easy. It minimized my financial responsibilities and exaggerated my security. Grandpa Samuel, who was having a lucid day, looked at me with pride. "Our Ellie has always been the sensible one," he said, patting my hand. I saw a flicker of triumph in Vanessa's eyes. His words, meant as a compliment, had just become a piece of evidence in their case against me. They were clever, I had to give them that. They never said anything overtly malicious in front of me. Their campaign was one of nuance, of carefully chosen words and strategically timed conversations. They were painting me into a corner, creating a portrait of a woman who was content, independent, and most importantly, not in need. They knew our grandparents' greatest desire was to be fair and to provide for their family. So, they redefined what fair meant. In their twisted logic, fairness didn't mean equality. It meant giving more to those who supposedly needed it more. By inflating my security and highlighting their own financial pressures, Mark's fluctuating income, Vanessa's high-cost lifestyle, they were tilting the scales in their favor. The shadows in our family were growing longer, and in those dark spaces, a plot was taking root, nurtured by greed and watered with lies. I could feel the chill, but I couldn't yet see the source. Grandpa Samuel passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in early spring. The world seemed to lose its color. The sturdy anchor of our family was gone, and we were all adrift in a sea of grief. The funeral was a blur of black clothes, hushed condolences, and the scent of lilies. Through it all, Vanessa was a pillar of chilling efficiency, organizing the service, accepting sympathies, and managing the arrangements with the same detached competence she applied to a stock portfolio. Mark was more openly emotional, but his grief seemed intertwined with a nervous energy I couldn't place. I simply felt hollowed out, a space carved out of my heart that would never be filled. A week after the funeral, the family gathered at Grandma Helen's house. The air was thick with unspoken thoughts. The topic of the will hung over us, a silent guest at the table. Vanessa eventually brought it up, her tone gentle but firm. "The lawyer will be in touch to schedule a formal reading," she announced, looking mainly at my grandmother. But Grandpa and Grandma made their wishes very clear. "Everything is in order." She glanced at me with an expression that I thought was pity. At the time, I assumed it was for my grief. I would soon learn it was for my ignorance. That evening, I got a call from my cousin Jenna. She was a paralegal, and her sharp, methodical mind was a comfort to me. We were close, more like sisters than my own sister and I had become. "Can I come over?" she asked, her voice unusually strained. "There's something we need to talk about." When she arrived at my apartment, her face was pale. She sat on my sofa but refused the tea I offered. She fidgeted with the strap of her purse, unable to meet my eyes. "What is it, Jen?" I asked, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "You're scaring me." She finally looked up, her eyes full of apology. "It's about the will, Ellie," she began, speaking softly. "Aunt Helen was overwhelmed, and she asked me to look over some of Grandpa's papers with her just to get them organized before the lawyer deals with them. I saw a copy of the most recent will." She paused, taking a deep breath. "You're not in it." The words hung in the air, sharp and unbelievable. I felt the blood drain from my face. "What? That's not possible. Grandpa would never, why?" Jenna's expression hardened. "He didn't do it alone. There's a clause, an explanatory one. I memorized the wording." She closed her eyes for a second, as if recalling a painful text. "It says something like, 'To my beloved granddaughter Alina, I leave my endless love and pride.' In consultation with her siblings, it has been determined that she is in a position of significant financial security. And it is my and my wife's wish that our material assets be distributed to her siblings, Mark and Vanessa, whose family and career obligations present more immediate financial needs." I stared at her, my mind refusing to process the information. Erased. I had been erased. The word echoed in the sudden silence of my apartment. It wasn't about the money. I had never thought of my grandparents' legacy in terms of dollars and cents. It was about the meaning, the message. It was a formal declaration that I didn't matter in the same way, that my life, my work, my careful planning had been used as a weapon against me. The phrase, in consultation with her siblings, was the key that unlocked everything. The whispers, the closed-door meetings, the backhanded compliments about my simple life, it all clicked into place. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a calculated, deliberate act of sabotage. They told him that, I whispered, my voice trembling. They went to our grandparents and told them I didn't need anything. It's worse than that, Ellie, Jenna said, leaning forward. The wording suggests they presented it as if it were a noble sacrifice on your part, as if you were all in agreement that this was the fairest way. They didn't just cut you out, they used your good name to do it. The betrayal was breathtaking in its cruelty. They hadn't just taken something from me, they had twisted my grandparents' love and my own character into a justification for their greed. They made me the reason for my own exclusion. A wave of cold fury washed over the shock. I thought of Vanessa's condescending praise and Mark's easy deflections. They weren't just being dismissive, they were laying the groundwork for this moment. They had systematically dismantled my place in the family's future, all while smiling to my face. The pain was immense, a physical ache in my chest. It felt as though a part of my history had been declared null and void. My name, spoken with love by my grandfather my entire life, was now attached to a clause of dismissal. The tapestry of memories I held so dear felt like a lie, its golden threads of love and fairness brutally snipped by the very people I was bound to by blood. In that moment, I wasn't just grieving the loss of my grandfather. I was grieving the loss of my siblings and the family I thought we were. The days following Jenna's revelation were a fog of anger and sorrow. I went through the motions of life, going to work, shelving books, answering questions, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying years of conversations, searching for the clues I had missed. Every memory was now tainted. Every shared laugh, every holiday dinner felt like a scene from a play where I was the only one who didn't know my lines. The feeling of being erased was suffocating. My siblings, Vanessa and Mark, called a few times, their voices dripping with fake sympathy. "We know this is hard, Ellie," Vanessa said. "We're here for you." The hypocrisy was so sharp it almost made me laugh. I kept my responses short and non-committal, unable to confront them, not yet. I needed more than just a second-hand account of a clause in a will. I needed something solid. My focus shifted to my grandmother. She was adrift, mourning the loss of her partner of over 60 years. When I visited, I found her sitting in Grandpa's favorite armchair, his worn cardigan draped over her shoulders. She seemed smaller, more fragile. I didn't have the heart to bring up the will to add another layer of pain to her grief. Instead, we talked about him. We shared stories, flipping through old photo albums. It was during one of these conversations that the first glimmer of hope appeared. "He was so meticulous, your grandfather," Grandma Helen said with a sad smile, tracing a finger over a black-and-white photo of him as a young engineer. "Always planning, always documenting, right up to the end." She sighed, her gaze becoming distant. In his last few months, he became obsessed with that old digital camera of his, said he was making a video for posterity. He spent hours in his study, just talking to the little machine. I thought it was just him wanting to tell his stories one last time. My heart skipped a beat. A video? My grandfather wasn't particularly tech-savvy, but he was precise. If he was documenting something, he would have had a clear purpose. "A video, Grandma, do you know where it is?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Oh, goodness, I have no idea," she said, waving her hand vaguely. "Probably on one of those little chip things. He put it away somewhere safe," he said. He was always putting things in his safe places. That was all I needed. A mission. The idea that my grandfather might have left one final message, his own story in his own words, took root in my mind. It felt like a quintessential Grandpa Samuel thing to do, a final, carefully engineered blueprint of his thoughts. The next day, I asked Jenna to help me. Her paralegal mind was perfect for this kind of search. We went to my grandparents' house under the pretense of helping Grandma sort through some of his belongings. She was grateful for the company and the help, and she gave us free rein of his study. The room was exactly as he'd left it. It smelled of old paper and pipe smoke. His desk was a monument to a well-ordered life, pens neatly aligned, papers stacked in precise piles, books organized by subject. We started methodically. We looked through every drawer, every folder, every shoebox filled with old receipts and warranties. For hours, we found nothing but the mundane artifacts of a long life. I could feel my hope starting to wane. Maybe my grandmother had misremembered. Maybe it was just an old man's rambling project that he never finished. Jenna, however, was more persistent. "Think like an engineer, Ellie," she said, tapping her chin. He was a man who built bridges. He believed in structure, in fail-safes. He wouldn't leave something important just lying around. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on a heavy, fireproof lockbox tucked away on the bottom shelf of his main bookcase. "What about that?" Grandma Helen had told me it was where he kept his and her birth certificates, passports, and other important documents. She had the key, which she kept in her jewelry box. After I explained what we were looking for, she retrieved it for us, her curiosity piqued. With trembling hands, I unlocked the box. Inside were the expected files: birth certificates, marriage licenses, property deeds. But underneath them was a small, black object that didn't belong. It was a USB flash drive, the kind you could hang on a keychain. Attached to it was a small, yellowed luggage tag. On it, in my grandfather's neat, angular handwriting, were 4 simple words: "For Ellie, my final word." I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. It was real. He had left something behind. It felt like finding a message in a bottle, a voice from across the ocean of death. This tiny piece of plastic and metal held the truth. It was a ghost on film, a final witness waiting to testify. Jenna put a steadying hand on my arm. "Well," she said softly, "let's go see what he had to say." We didn't watch it at my grandmother's house. I couldn't bear the thought of her seeing it for the first time without any preparation, and I needed to see it myself first, to understand what I was dealing with. Jenna and I drove back to my apartment in near silence, the small USB drive feeling as heavy as a gravestone in my pocket. Once inside, I plugged it into my laptop. My hands were shaking so badly that it took 3 tries to get it into the port. A single video file appeared on the screen, titled simply, "Declaration." I clicked play. The image flickered to life. It was my grandfather, sitting at his desk in his study. He looked frail, thinner than I had remembered, but his eyes were clear and direct. He looked straight into the lens as if he were looking right at me. "Hello, Alina," he began, his voice weak but steady. "If you are watching this, it means I am gone, and it means you have found this as I intended. I hope you found it before it was too late." He took a moment, gathering his strength. "I'm making this recording because I have some things to set straight, things that have been weighing on my conscience." He then proceeded to lay out the entire story. He spoke of his immense love and pride for all 3 of his grandchildren. He talked about our unique strengths, my quiet diligence, Vanessa's drive, Mark's charisma. And then his tone shifted. "In recent months," he said, his expression clouding with disappointment, "Vanessa and Mark have come to me and your grandmother on several occasions. They have painted a picture of the family's finances that I now believe to be manipulative. They spoke of their own struggles, their mortgages, their children's futures. And they spoke of you, my dear Ellie." My heart pounded as he continued. "They told us that you were secure, that your simple life meant you were free of financial burden. They told us that you would want them to have your share, that it would be the fair thing to do, to help them where they needed it most. They presented it as a unified family decision. Your grandmother and I, in our old age, wanted to believe them. We wanted to believe in the goodness of our grandchildren. In a moment of weakness, seeking peace above all else, I agreed to have the will changed." He paused and looked down, his shame palpable even through the screen. "It was a mistake. I knew it almost as soon as I did it. To use your responsibility and contentment against you, it is a profound injustice." Tears streamed down my face as I listened. He knew, he understood. He hadn't abandoned me. "This video," he said, looking back into the camera with a newfound fire in his eyes, is my true and final testament. The written will, signed under emotional duress and based on misinformation from my other grandchildren, does not reflect my true wishes. My wish has always been the same, that my estate, everything Helen and I have built, be divided equally among our 3 grandchildren. Vanessa, Mark, and Alina. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, no more, no less, that is my final bequest. This is the truth. He ended the video by speaking to me directly. Ellie, I am sorry I was not strong enough to stop this in person. I am counting on you to be strong enough now. Do what is right. Your grandmother taught you how to find the answers. Now you have one, use it. The video ended. The screen went black, but my grandfather's words echoed in the room. I was crying, but not just from sadness. It was a cry of relief, of vindication. He hadn't erased me. He had armed me. Jenna sat beside me, her hand on my shoulder. So, she said, her voice filled with a quiet fury, what's the plan? The grief and hurt that had paralyzed me for days began to solidify into cold, hard resolve. Confronting them privately would be useless. They would lie, deny, and try to manipulate me just as they had our grandparents. No, this had to be done in a way that left no room for argument. The truth had to be revealed in a formal setting where their lies would have nowhere to hide. The lawyer scheduled the official reading of the will for next Friday, I said, my voice hoarse but firm. We're all supposed to be there. Vanessa, Mark, me, Grandma Helen. I looked from the laptop to Jenna. They're expecting to walk in there and witness their victory. They're expecting me to sit there, quiet and defeated. A new kind of strength flowed through me, a strength I'd inherited from the man on the screen. They're going to get a surprise, I said. We're going to let them have their moment. We'll let the lawyer read the will exactly as it's written. And then, when they're feeling secure in their deception, I'm going to present my grandfather's final amendment. I was no longer the quiet observer. I was the executor of my grandfather's true will. I was setting the stage for the final act, and I would not let him down. The day of the will reading was gray and overcast, the sky a perfect reflection of my mood. It wasn't a mood of sadness anymore, but one of somber determination. I drove to the lawyer's office with my grandmother, who held my hand the entire way. She was nervous, still fragile from her loss. I hadn't told her about the video. I'd simply told her that I had something to share that I believed Grandpa wanted everyone to see and that I needed her to trust me. To her credit, she agreed without question, perhaps sensing the shift in my demeanor from defeated to resolute. Jenna met us in the lobby, giving me a solid, reassuring nod. We walked into the conference room. Vanessa and Mark were already there, seated at the large mahogany table. They were dressed in expensive, somber attire. Vanessa gave me a thin, sympathetic smile. Ellie, I'm glad you came. I know this must be difficult, she said, her voice oozing with condescension. Mark stood to give our grandmother a kiss on the cheek, avoiding my eyes completely. They both looked confident, relaxed, like 2 predators who knew their prey was already trapped. They had no idea the trap was about to be sprung on them. The lawyer, a kind-faced man named Mr. Davies, began the proceedings. He spoke in the measured, gentle tones of someone accustomed to dealing with grieving families. He explained the legal formalities and then began to read from the document. I watched my siblings as he spoke. They maintained expressions of solemnity, but I could see the anticipation in their eyes. When Mr. Davies reached the distribution of assets, a palpable tension filled the room. He read the clause about their family and career obligations. He read the part about my supposed financial security. And then he read the final declaration. And so, the entirety of the residual estate shall be divided in 2 equal shares, one for my granddaughter, Vanessa, and one for my grandson, Mark. A heavy silence fell. Vanessa subtly reached over and squeezed Mark's hand under the table. She then turned to me, her face a perfect mask of compassion. Ellie, we know this is a surprise, she began, launching into a clearly rehearsed speech. But please know that this is what Grandpa wanted. He was so proud of you for being able to stand on your own 2 feet. And of course, if you ever need anything, anything at all, our doors are always open. Mark nodded in earnest agreement. Absolutely, Elle. We're still family. We'll always take care of you. Their performance was sickeningly perfect. They were not just content with their prize, they felt the need to rub it in with false generosity. I let them finish. I let the silence stretch for a moment longer. Then I cleared my throat. All eyes turned to me. "Thank you, Vanessa, Mark," I said, my voice calm and steady, betraying none of the storm raging inside me. "Mr. Davies, before we conclude, I believe there is an addendum, a codicil of sorts. My grandfather left a final statement that I believe clarifies his testamentary intent." Vanessa frowned. "What are you talking about, Ellie? The will is the will. It's all been signed and notarized." "I'm not talking about a written document," I replied, pulling the USB drive from my pocket and placing it on the table. "I'm talking about this." Mr. Davies looked at the drive, then at me, an inquisitive look on his face. "What is this, Ms. Aliner?" "It's a video my grandfather recorded a week before he passed away," I explained. "He titled it My Final Word. I believe it is legally relevant." Vanessa scoffed. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Ellie. Grandpa was probably just rambling. You can't be serious." "I am completely serious," I said, my gaze locking onto hers. "Are you afraid to see?" What he had to say? The challenge hung in the air. Mr. Davies, obligated to consider all evidence of a testator's intent, cleared his throat. "I have a laptop with a projector. I believe we should view it." The color drained from Vanessa's face. Mark started fidgeting with his tie, his earlier confidence evaporating. Jenna helped Mr. Davies set up the projector. The conference room lights were dimmed and the wall at the end of the table lit up. And then there he was. My grandfather, larger than life, his clear eyes seeming to pierce the gloom of the room. He began to speak, his voice filling the silence. I didn't watch the screen. I watched my siblings. I watched as Grandpa spoke of his love for all of us. I watched as he detailed their campaign of manipulation. Vanessa's face went from pale to ashen. She stared at the screen, her mouth slightly agape in horror. Mark sank lower in his chair, unable to watch, his face buried in his hands. When Grandpa got to the part about being pressured to change the will, Vanessa shot a venomous glare at me, as if this was somehow my fault. But her anger dissolved into pure shock when he looked directly into the camera and said, "The written will does not reflect my true wishes." The final blow came when he declared his true intent: 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Equal shares. The truth delivered from beyond the grave. When the video ended and the screen went black, the silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of utter and complete devastation. Vanessa and Mark were exposed, their greed and deceit laid bare by the one person whose love they had so cynically weaponized. The final bequest had been delivered, not by a lawyer, but by our grandfather himself. Mr. Davies switched the lights back on, the sudden brightness feeling harsh and interrogatory. He cleared his throat, looking not at the will in front of him, but at the stunned faces of my siblings. "Well," he said, his professional tone barely concealing his own shock, "that is extraordinarily clear. While a video can be complex to probate, this video, serving as a direct statement of the testator's intent and explaining the circumstances of the written will's creation, would carry immense weight in any court proceeding. It effectively invalidates the distribution clause we just read." He looked at Vanessa and Mark. "I would strongly advise against contesting this. It would be a prolonged, costly, and almost certainly unsuccessful endeavor." Vanessa was speechless. Her carefully constructed world of control and superiority had been demolished in under 10 minutes. All the color had drained from her face, leaving behind a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She stared at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so intense it was almost tangible. She didn't see a sister. She saw the person who had ruined her perfect plan. Mark, on the other hand, just looked broken. He was slumped in his chair, staring at the polished surface of the table as if it held the answers to the universe. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't look at anyone. My grandmother, who had sat silently through the entire video, finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but laced with steel. "Vanessa, Mark," she said, and both of them flinched at the sound of her voice. "Your grandfather and I built our lives on love and honesty. To think you would use our love, our trust, to lie to us like this, to turn against your own sister." She shook her head, a single tear tracing a path down her wrinkled cheek. "Your grandfather was a better man than you deserved." He tried to protect the peace of this family, even when you were poisoning it. She stood up, her small frame radiating a strength I hadn't seen in months. I am so deeply ashamed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her quiet disappointment was more damning than any scream. She walked over to me, took my arm, and said, "Come, Alina, let's go home." We left them there, sitting in the ruins of their own making. I didn't look back. The drive home was quiet. My grandmother held my hand, her grip firm and steady. We didn't need to talk about what had happened. The truth was out, and the healing, however long it might take, could finally begin. The following weeks were a cascade of legal formalities. True to Mr. Davies' prediction, Vanessa and Mark did not contest the will. Their lawyers communicated with ours, and the estate was settled according to my grandfather's true wishes, divided into 3 equal shares. But the financial settlement was the smallest part of the resolution. The real aftermath was the shattering of our family. Vanessa sent me one long, vitriolic email blaming me for airing our family's dirty laundry and humiliating them. She accused me of being selfish and vindictive. There was no apology, no remorse, only rage that her plan had failed. I deleted it without replying. Mark tried to call me once. I didn't answer. He left a rambling, tearful voice. Email full of excuses and self-pity. He was sorry, he said, but Vanessa had convinced him it was the right thing to do. He never once acknowledged the hurt he had caused, only the trouble he was now in. The relationships are broken, perhaps irreparably. We no longer have family holidays. The tapestry of our childhood is shredded. But in its place, something new is being woven. My bond with my grandmother is stronger than ever. We are a smaller family now, but an honest one. My cousin Jenna and I are closer than sisters. We have defined our family by truth and loyalty, not by blood. I used a portion of my inheritance to set up a literacy foundation in my grandparents' names at my library, a tribute to the 2 librarians, one professional, one retired, who taught me the power of stories. It's a legacy of knowledge and community, something I know they would both be proud of. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, I take out the wooden treasure box my grandfather made for me all those years ago. Inside, among the letters and photographs, is the small USB drive. It is my most precious possession. It doesn't hold a monetary value, but it contains something far more important: truth, justice, and the enduring power of a good man's love. My siblings tried to erase me from our family's story, but they failed. My grandfather made sure I had the pen to write the final chapter. And it's a chapter of strength, peace, and quiet vindication.